Isabella. Her topic will be controlling electron-nuclear entanglement in solid-state systems. Can you share your screen? Great. Yes, take it away. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, so my name is Isabella Gnasso. I'm a grad student in Sophia Economy and Ed Barnes's group at Virginia Tech. And I'm going to be, talking about our methods for controlling electron-nuclear entanglement in optically active solid-state systems. Okay, so there are many physical platforms that have garnered interest for generating quantum networks and performing quantum sensing. This includes color centers in diamond, silicon carbide, and silicon vacancy centers, as well as quantum dots and rare earth ions. All of these systems are spin-photon interfaces, which means they are characterized by a confined electron that is optically controlled. And we control this electron by exciting it from one of its ground states to this auxiliary excited state. And when the electron decays back down to its ground state, it spontaneously emits a photon that is entangled with it. And this is a crucial feature for realizing these applications that I've talked about. But one challenge associated with these platforms is the fact that this electron is interacting with the nuclear spins in the host materials through the hyperfine interactions, which lead to decoherence. We know if left uncontrolled, these nuclear spins will basically cause electron spin dephasing, and it prevents us from utilizing them as a resource for quantum memory. So basically, we know that if we are able to control them, we can mitigate these destructive effects. But in order to control these nuclear spins, we need a way to basically quantify the electron-nuclear dynamics taking place in the system. And this is typically a hard problem to solve because we're dealing with many body systems with complicated interactions and many degrees of freedom. But I'm going to talk about my group's method for basically implementing an entanglement metric called the one tangling power to make this problem tractable. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to talk a bit about my chosen metric for controlling these electron-nuclear dynamics, and then I'll demonstrate the use of the one tangles on a physical system. I'll look at indium gallium arsenide quantum dots and show you how we are able to compute the dephasing times of the electron spin and demonstrate ways to target specific nuclear spins in the platform. And then I'll give a little bit more detail about the formalism and show kind of our analysis of what happens when we apply dynamical decoupling to the quantum dot. Okay, so like I said, our goal is to study many body entanglement dynamics in central spin systems. The way our formalism works is we basically average the purity with of a particular spin in the system with respect to all possible initial states. So what this looks like in practice is basically initializing the system in some state. Here I'm using a toy model where the two red spins are nuclei and we have a purple electron. Basically, we'll apply the unitary evolution that we are interested in studying the entangling capabilities of. And then after the system has evolved under this pull sequence, we will calculate the purity with respect to a single spin by tracing out the rest. To get an average measure of the entangling effects of this evolution, we'll just repeat this process with different initial states of the system. Okay, so when we apply this quantity called the one tangling power to indium gallium arsenide quantum dots, which I've included a schematic here on the right just to show you. Basically, these quantum dots are characterized as 3D confinement potentials. They contain anywhere from 10 to the 4th to 10 to the 5th nuclear spins, and these nuclear spins are all either spin 3 halves in the case of gallium or 9 halves in the case of indium. So I have basically here computed the electronic one tangling power, so the amount of entanglement between the central electron and all the nuclear spins around it, when it's surrounded by a simulated ensemble of 80,000 spins. And what we see here is basically when we plot this as a function of time, you can see that the one tangling power saturates, and we associate this saturation as, complete maximal entanglement between the electron and its surroundings, and so we can think about this in the context of decoherence. And this time it takes for the electron one tangling power to saturate is consistent with what we know in the literature to be the decoherence times of the electron spin. Later, I will talk about how we can think about improving these effects just by applying dynamical decoupling later. The other thing we can do is look at the amount of entanglement between a single nuclear spin and all the rest. And what you can see here, if we look at this is a function of position throughout the dot, basically we can pinpoint instances where we have our nuclear spin is maximally entangled or when it's completely decoupled. And this informs ways that we could possibly target specific spins while decoupling unwanted ones. So a little bit more about the formalism. What this looks like really is we have this quantity tau, which is 1 minus the subsystem purity. Basically, it tells us about the correlations of this particular state. But we are interested in the average entangling capabilities of our unitary. And so what we do to obtain this quantity epsilon, basically we average over all of our one tangles with respect to all possible initial states of the system. And this tells us the average entangling capabilities of U to entangle Q subsystems Q with P. Okay, so other members of our group have basically shown that for Hamiltonians that have this block diagonal structure, so basically we have something, it's a hyperfine type interaction here. So you're projecting onto the electron spin subspace on the left-hand side, and then we have the nuclear part of the Hamiltonian in H0 and H1. Basically, they showed that we can simplify our one tangling power in terms of this quantity G1, which is known as the first Maclin invariant. So very quickly, I'll explain what these Maclin invariants are. So basically, we can think about them in the context of the Cartan decomposition, which basically tells us that any 2-qubit unitary can be written in terms of its local and non-local parts. And this, so these parameters C1, C2, and C3 in the non-local part of U tells us about the entangling structure of our gate. And G1 and G2, these Maclin invariants, are functions of these parameters. So yeah, together they uniquely define the entanglement class of a 2-qubit unitary. And this is a very powerful simplification to be able to write the one tangling power in terms of G1 because it lets us think about many body entanglement in terms of just spin-spin correlations. Okay, so this previous result basically applies to systems like NV centers and diamond and silicon carbide that contain nuclear spins that are only spin 1/2. But we have since generalized these expressions to handle other interesting systems that include nuclear spins that are greater than spin 1/2. And so what we found when we derived these expressions was basically, again, we get one tangling power expressions that they depend on which spin has been bipartitioned from the rest. But in both cases, they depend on the dimension of the spins in the system and this G1 that we now call our generalized Maclin invariant. So it, like the traditional one, it tells you about the entangling capabilities of your gate, but now it's not limited to the 2-qubit case. Okay, so like I said, we also use these expressions to explore the effects of dynamical decoupling on the quantum dots. And so what I did first was just look at what happens when we apply a single iteration of the CPMG sequence. So this is just 2 pi pulses, essentially the spin echo process applied twice. And what we found was just with this one iteration of the sequence, you can see an improvement in the saturation of the electronic one tangling power. So this is telling us that we have canceled out the destructive effects of the nuclear spins interacting with the electron through the Overhauser field. And we also wanted to explore basically what happens to the dephasing times of the electron as we tune our external magnetic field. So here I've plotted this in terms of the nuclear alarm wire frequencies. Okay. And so, after thinking about canceling out the noise caused by these uncontrolled nuclear spin interactions, we wanted to think about how can we actually deliberately grow entanglement between the electron and the nuclear spins. And so we also thought about ways to maximize this entanglement in a very deliberate and controlled way. You can see here for arbitrary parameters after one iteration of the CPMG sequence, the nuclear one tangling power is relatively low. But I also looked at what happens when we apply 85 iterations, for example, of this pulse sequence, and basically it shows that we can effectively maximize the entanglement for nuclear spins that have the the parameters that were chosen in the simulation. And what this basically means is that we are able to um, deliberately entangle nuclear spins with these hyperfine parameters with the rest of the system. And we can decouple unwanted ones at the same time to potentially generate many body entangled states and target specific nuclei as quantum memory. Okay, so in summary, I showed how we use an entanglement metric called the one tangling power to solve many body entanglement dynamics in an exact way, and use this to compute dephasing times and start to think about high fidelity gate design in order to target subsets of particular nuclear spins. We also studied the conditions that give rise to sustained electron spin coherence using dynamical decoupling. And just as a reminder, this formalism doesn't just apply to quantum dots, although we use that as our example. We can think about this for many other types of central spin systems of any total size and spin. And with that, I'll thank my group mates and my advisors and our collaborators who helped us with this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Great timing. Very cool talk.
Thank you.
Any question from the chat? Or if anyone wants to ask a question, Galen?
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about maximizing the entanglement between the nuclear spins and the electron spins. Do you guys sort of predict any physical or physical material systems where you can maximize this interaction?
That's a good question. I think our approach basically can be tailored to any physical system that has this type of Hamiltonian structure. So, really, it kind of gives us insight to ways that we could potentially probe like specific Hamiltonian parameters, depending on the system.
Okay, and sorry, I know you said this earlier, but can you just remind me again the the relevant systems? Something.
Oh yeah. So the ones that I've like thought about so far, I can yeah, I mentioned NV centers in diamonds, silicon carbide, germanium defects in diamond, silicon vacancies, rare earth ions like ytterbium in like a lattice of vanadium nuclei, and the gallium arsenide quantum dots or indium gallium arsenide.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any more questions? I have a question about this quantum memory application or for like quantum computing in general. I see that you're trying to, if I'm understanding correctly, like you're trying to entangle like or engineer a way to entangle the nuclear spin and the electron. But like for quantum computing, I would have thought like qubits are, like a set of the same exact physical system. In this case, is it gonna be like one qubit is the nuclear spin and the other is the electron? And how are you gonna, like have like a lot of them entangled together? Like, yeah, do you have any
Oh.
like thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, like we can consider it, like by definition, people consider any sort of like you can in theory, any two-level system could be considered a qubit. So the electron naturally is one. These nuclear spins that are spin 1/2 naturally are as well. But higher spins, we could think of them as qubits. So they could have arbitrarily, many levels, or we can like think of them as collections of qubits by looking at subspaces. And so, yeah, so the idea is to be able to transfer the information because we can only optically drive the electron in the system that I'm considering. So the idea is to take the information encoded in your electronic spin state and transfer that to the nuclear spins. And they have longer coherence times than the electron. And so naturally they lend themselves, if you can control the interactions, as memory. Right. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. That sounds very cool.
Well, thank you so much for the questions.
Yeah, thank you.